The cabin stood alone against the wind, a weathered sentinel in an ocean of prairie grass. Inside, Clara's hands moved with practiced rhythm, kneading dough against the worn wooden counter. Flour dusted her forearms like pale constellations. The scent of yeast and warmth filled the small kitchen, pushing back against the chill that crept beneath the door frame. She shaped the dough with palms that had known 68 years of work, forming it into a perfect oval before sliding it into the cast-iron oven. As she closed the heavy door, she paused, listening to the quiet. Nothing but the crackle of the fire and the distant call of a hawk. Hours later, she pulled the golden loaf from the oven. Steam rose in gentle curls, carrying the aroma of home to every corner of the cabin. Clara set it on the windowsill to cool, watching as the last light of day painted the plains in amber and shadow. She didn't notice at first. It was only when she turned the loaf to wrap it that something caught the dying sunlight, a flash of silver buried in the crust, like a secret waiting to be told. Clara lived alone in the foothills where Nebraska met Wyoming, in a cabin her husband Jacob had built with his own hands 30 years ago. The nearest town was 17 miles east, a collection of buildings that seemed to huddle together against the vastness of the land. She made the journey once a month for supplies, speaking little, purchasing only what she needed. Her home was simple but spoke volumes about the woman who inhabited it. Shelves lined with books worn from repeated readings. A rocking chair positioned to catch both the morning light and the view of the western hills. On the mantel above the stone fireplace, a row of photographs in wooden frames, Clara as a young woman with dark hair falling past her shoulders, Clara and Jacob on their wedding day, a group of ranch hands gathered around a campfire, faces caught mid-laugh. No recent photos. Nothing from the last 15 years. Her hands bore the marks of her life, calluses from ranch work, a burn scar on her left thumb from a branding iron, blue veins that mapped the years beneath paper-thin skin. She moved with the deliberate efficiency of someone accustomed to doing everything for herself. Outside, the land stretched away in all directions. To the west, the foothills rose toward distant mountains. To the east, the prairie rolled on like a tawny sea. The nearest neighbor was 5 miles away, the Hendersons, who checked on her occasionally despite her insistence that she needed nothing. Clara's days followed the rhythm of the seasons. She tended her garden in summer, preserved food for winter, chopped wood in fall, and endured the isolation when snow made the roads impassable. She baked bread twice weekly, the ritual unchanged since Jacob had first taught her, back when she was still a city girl learning the ways of ranch life. The storm announced itself with a distant rumble of thunder. Clara glanced toward the window, watching dark clouds gather on the horizon. Rain would be welcome. The land had been dry for weeks. She busied herself with dinner preparations, a simple stew that would last several days. The knock, when it came, startled her so badly she nearly dropped the pot. 3 sharp raps against the wooden door, barely audible above the rising wind. For a moment, she stood frozen, listening. No one came here unannounced. The Hendersons always called on the radio first. The knock came again, more insistent. Clara wiped her hands on her apron and moved cautiously to the door. Through the small window, she could make out the shape of a man, tall, shoulders hunched against the wind. She hesitated, hand on the latch, then slowly pulled the door open just enough to see him properly. "Evening, ma'am," he said, voice low and rough-edged. "Sorry to trouble you. My truck broke down about a mile back. Storm's coming in fast." He was perhaps 50, with weather-lined skin and eyes the color of faded denim. His clothes were dusty but not ragged. Jeans, boots, a canvas jacket. Nothing about him suggested danger, yet Clara felt a flutter of unease. "There's a town 17 miles east," she said. "Won't make it before that storm hits." He glanced over his shoulder at the darkening sky. "Just need to use your phone, if you've got one." A gust of wind drove the first fat raindrops against the cabin. Lightning flashed, illuminating the man's face. Tired, wary, but open. Clara made her decision. She stepped back, opening the door wider. "Come in. The phone's not working. Lines go down whenever the weather turns. You can wait out the storm here." "Thank you, ma'am." He stepped inside, removing his hat. "Name's Thomas. Thomas Mercer. Clara Harmon." She closed the door against the wind. "Hang your jacket there. Fire's going if you're cold." Thomas moved with the careful courtesy of a man in someone else's space. He stood by the fire, hands outstretched to the warmth, while Clara returned to her stew. Neither spoke for several minutes, the silence broken only by the bubbling pot and the increasing drumbeat of rain on the roof. "Smells good," Thomas finally said. "Been a while since I had home cooking." Clara nodded, adding a pinch of salt to the pot. "Where you headed?" "West. Got family in Idaho I haven't seen in years. Long drive. Yes, ma'am. Another silence fell. Clara stirred the stew, aware of the stranger's presence like a change in air pressure. It had been so long since she'd shared her space with anyone. I can pay you, Thomas said suddenly. For the trouble? Clara shook her head. No need. There's fresh bread on the counter if you're hungry now. Dinner will be ready soon. Thomas moved to the counter where the loaf sat cooling. You baked this today? Nothing better than fresh bread. It's still warm, Clara said, not looking up from her work. Help yourself. The storm settled in for the night, rain lashing against the windows, wind howling around the eaves. Clara set 2 bowls of stew on the small table, along with butter and the bread Thomas had already sliced. They ate without much conversation, the silence comfortable enough. As Clara cleared the dishes, Thomas leaned back in his chair. That's the best meal I've had in months. Thank you. You're welcome. She placed the dishes in the sink. You can take the spare room tonight. First door on the left. There are extra blankets in the chest if you need them. Thomas nodded, then reached for his wallet. Please, let me give you something for your trouble. Clara waved him off. We don't get many visitors out here. It's nice to have company for a change. Later, after Thomas had retired to the spare room, Clara sat in her rocking chair by the dying fire. The storm continued its assault, but inside, the cabin felt different somehow. The presence of another person had changed something, as if the walls themselves had expanded slightly to accommodate the extra breath, the additional heartbeat. She thought about the silver object she'd glimpsed in the bread. In the commotion of the unexpected guest, she hadn't investigated further. It would wait until morning. Dawn broke clear and cold, the storm having spent its fury during the night. Clara rose with the sun, as was her habit, and found Thomas already awake, standing on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sunrise paint the wet landscape. Hope I didn't wake you, he said as she joined him. Found the coffee. Hope that's all right. It's fine. Clara wrapped her cardigan tighter around herself. Sleep well. Better than I have in weeks. He sipped his coffee. You've got a peaceful place here. Clara nodded, looking out over the land she knew as intimately as her own hands. It suits me. They shared a simple breakfast, eggs from Clara's hens, more of yesterday's bread toasted over the fire. As they ate, Thomas spoke of his travels, of the small towns and wide spaces he'd passed through. Clara found herself listening intently, drawn to his stories of places she'd never seen. What about you? Thomas asked eventually. You been here long? 30 years, Clara said. My husband built this cabin when we got married. He died 15 years ago. I'm sorry. Clara shrugged slightly. Life goes on. After breakfast, Clara decided to bake again. The rhythm of it soothed her, measuring flour, adding yeast, working the dough with practiced hands. Thomas sat at the table, watching her work. My grandmother used to bake, he said. Every Sunday without fail. Said bread was the most honest food there was, just flour, water, salt, and time. Clara smiled faintly. Your grandmother was right. As she needed, she found herself telling Thomas about Jacob, how they'd met when she was teaching in Cheyenne and he was delivering cattle, how she'd left city life behind to marry a rancher, how they'd built everything together. He taught me to bake, she said, punching down the dough. Said his mother's recipe was too good not to pass on. Sounds like a good man. He was. Clara shaped the dough into a loaf. The best I've known. While the bread baked, Thomas went to check on his truck. He returned an hour later, boots muddy from the wet ground. Alternator's shot, he reported. Won't be going anywhere until I can get a replacement. Henderson's place is 5 miles north, Clara said. He might have something that would work. Or he could drive you to town. Thomas nodded. I'll head there tomorrow if the roads are passable. He hesitated. Unless you'd rather I found another place to stay tonight. Clara considered this. The proper thing would be to send him on his way. She barely knew this man. Yet something in her resisted the thought of returning to solitude so quickly. You're welcome to stay another night, she said finally. Roads might be better tomorrow. That evening, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Thomas produced a battered harmonica from his pocket. Mind if I play a bit? Clara shook her head, and he began a slow, wistful melody that filled the cabin with something that had been missing for years, music. She closed her eyes, letting the notes wash over her. When she opened them again, Thomas was watching her, his expression unreadable in the firelight. My husband used to play guitar, she said softly. I'd forgotten how much I missed music. Thomas nodded, understanding in his eyes. Music has a way of bringing back what we've lost. Later, after Thomas had gone to bed, Clara remembered the object in yesterday's bread. She unwrapped the remaining half-loaf and carefully broke it apart until she found it, a silver spur, small and intricately designed, its rowel still able to spin. She held it in her palm, confusion and something like fear washing over her. Jacob's spurs had been silver. He'd worn them on special occasions, proud of their craftsmanship. After his death, she'd packed them away with his other belongings in a box she kept in the back of her closet. She hadn't opened that box in years. Clara slept fitfully that night, the spur hidden in her bedside drawer. Questions circled in her mind like crows. How had it gotten into the bread? Had she somehow dropped it in the dough without noticing? Impossible. The box remained untouched in her closet. The only other explanation was Thomas. But how would he have known about Jacob's spurs? And why would he have put one in her bread? Morning brought no answers. Clara rose early and found the cabin empty, a note on the table. Gone to check the truck again. Back soon. Tea. She moved quickly to the spare room, searching for any clue to Thomas's identity or intentions. His few belongings revealed nothing unusual: clean clothes, a dog-eared paperback, a small toiletry kit. Nothing to suggest he was anything other than what he claimed to be. Clara returned to the kitchen, unsettled. She began preparing breakfast, trying to make sense of her suspicions. Perhaps she was overreacting. Perhaps there was a simple explanation. Thomas returned as she was setting the table. Roads are still bad, he reported. But I think I can make it to your neighbor's place later today. Clara nodded, studying his face for any sign of deception. She found none, only the same open expression she'd seen from the beginning. They ate in silence, the easy companionship of the previous day replaced by a tension Clara couldn't name. After breakfast, Thomas offered to split some wood to repay her hospitality. Through the window, she watched him work, his movements efficient and practiced. As the day wore on, Clara's unease grew. That night, she made a decision. After Thomas retired to the spare room, she would check the box in her closet. She needed to know if Jacob's spurs were still there. The evening passed slowly. They shared another meal, listened to the radio for a while, spoke little. When Thomas finally bid her good night, Clara waited until she heard his door close before moving to her bedroom. The box sat where it had for 15 years, pushed to the back of her closet beneath old blankets. Clara pulled it out with trembling hands and lifted the lid. Jacob's hat lay on top, then his good boots, a few books he'd treasured. Beneath these, wrapped in a bandana, should be his silver spurs. The bandana was there, but when she unwrapped it, only one spur remained. The other was gone. Clara sat back on her heels, heart pounding. How? When? She hadn't opened this box in years. The only explanation was Thomas, but that was impossible. He'd arrived only 2 days ago. Unless... A floorboard creaked in the hallway. Clara froze, listening. Soft footsteps moved away from her door, not toward the spare room, but toward the living area. She rose silently, slipped the remaining spur into her pocket, and followed. Thomas stood by the fireplace, looking at the photographs on the mantel. His back was to her, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. He reached out, touching the frame of one particular photo. The ranch hands gathered around the campfire. Who are you? Clara's voice cut through the silence. Thomas turned slowly. In the dim light, his face seemed different somehow, younger beneath the weathered lines. You know who I am, he said quietly. You've always known. Clara shook her head. I've never seen you before in my life. Thomas moved to the lamp and turned it up. The increased light revealed what darkness had hidden. His eyes, not just faded blue, but a particular shade Clara had seen before. Look closer, he said. Clara stepped forward, studying his face. There was something familiar in the set of his jaw, the shape of his brow. Something that reminded her of Jacob, she whispered. My father, Thomas corrected gently. The world seemed to tilt beneath Clara's feet. She gripped the back of a chair to steady herself. Jacob didn't have a son. He did. Thomas's voice held no accusation, only a deep sadness. Before he met you, my mother never told him about me. By the time I found out who my father was, he had already died. Clara shook her head again, denial rising like a tide. That's not possible. It is. Thomas reached into his pocket and produced a folded photograph. He handed it to Clara. My mother, Rebecca Mercer. Clara stared at the image of a young woman with Thomas's eyes and Jacob's smile. A cold certainty settled in her stomach. Jacob had spoken of Rebecca once, a relationship from his youth that had ended badly. The spur, Clara said, her voice barely audible. You put it in the bread. Thomas nodded. I found them both when I came through here 5 years ago. You were in town. I just wanted to see where my father had lived, what kind of woman he had married. I took one as proof, I guess, that he was real, that I had a connection to him. You broke into my home? Anger flared, pushing back against shock. The door was unlocked. I shouldn't have taken it. I'm sorry. He gestured toward the bread on the counter. I wanted to return it. I've been carrying it for 5 years, trying to work up the courage to meet you properly. So the truck breaking down was real. But I was coming here anyway. Thomas's expression was open, vulnerable. I just wanted to know him through you, to hear about him from someone who loved him. Clara pulled the matching spur from her pocket. The pair of them glinted in the lamplight, symbols of a past neither of them fully understood. Why didn't you just tell me who you were? She asked. Would you have believed me? Would you have let me stay? Thomas shook his head. I was afraid you'd turn me away before I had a chance to know anything about him. Clara sank into a chair, the weight of revelation pressing down on her. Jacob had a son he never knew about. A son who had his eyes, his build, even something of his manner. He would have wanted to know you, she said finally. He always wanted children. Thomas sat across from her, his face solemn in the lamplight. Tell me about him, please. And so, as the night deepened around the cabin, Clara began to speak. She told Thomas about Jacob's laugh, his gentle way with horses, his terrible singing voice. How he'd read poetry by the fire in winter. How he taught her to track deer through new snow. How he died, not dramatically, but slowly, cancer eating away at him until he was a shadow of himself. Thomas listened, sometimes asking questions, sometimes just nodding. As Clara spoke, she felt something shift within her, as if a door long sealed had been cracked open, allowing fresh air into rooms left too long unventilated. Dawn found them still talking, the fire burned down to embers. Clara made coffee, and they moved to the porch to watch the sunrise paint the land in gold and rose. I should go soon, Thomas said eventually. The roads will be passable now. Clara nodded, a strange reluctance filling her. This man was a stranger still, yet also something more, a connection to Jacob she had never expected to find. You could stay another day, she offered. If you wanted to. Thomas smiled, Jacob's smile. I'd like that. They spent the day together, Clara showing Thomas the ranch, telling stories of the life she and Jacob had built. Thomas fixed a loose board on the porch, chopped more wood, listened. By evening, the awkwardness between them had faded, replaced by something tentative but genuine. After dinner, Clara took out Jacob's old photo albums. They sat side by side, turning pages, Clara naming faces, Thomas asking questions. When they came to Jacob's childhood photos, Thomas touched them gently, seeing his own features echoed across generations. He would have loved knowing you, Clara said softly. He always had so much love to give. Thomas nodded, emotion tightening his throat. Thank you for sharing him with me. That night, Clara slept better than she had in years, as if some long-held tension had finally released its grip on her heart. Morning came clear and bright. Clara woke to find Thomas's truck packed, his few belongings loaded. He stood by the porch steps, waiting for her. You're leaving, she said, stating the obvious to fill the silence. I need to get to Idaho. My aunt, my mother's sister, is expecting me. He hesitated. But I could come back. On my way through. If that would be all right. Clara considered this. The past 3 days had appended her carefully constructed solitude, forcing her to confront memories she'd tried to bury with Jacob. Yet she felt more alive than she had in years. I'd like that, she said finally. The door will be open. Thomas smiled, that smile that was so like Jacob's it made her heart ache. I'll bring you something from Idaho. They're known for potatoes, right? Clara laughed, the sound surprising her with its ease. Bring yourself. That's enough. They stood for a moment in the morning light, neither quite ready for the goodbye. Then Thomas stepped forward and, hesitantly, hugged her. Clara stiffened briefly before returning the embrace. Thank you, he said simply. Drive safely, she replied, stepping back. And Thomas. I'm glad you found your way here. She watched his truck until it disappeared over the rise, dust settling in its wake. The cabin felt different now, not empty, but waiting. Clara turned and went inside, moving to the kitchen with purpose. She took flour from the bin, yeast from the jar, began the familiar ritual of bread making. As she worked the dough, she glanced at the mantel where the photograph stood. Later, she would add a new one. Thomas standing by the corral, Jacob's son come home at last. For now, she shaped the dough into a perfect oval, scoring the top with a knife, and slid it into the oven. Outside, the land stretched away unchanged, constant in its beauty and harshness. Inside, Clara hummed softly as she worked, a melody Thomas had played on his harmonica. The silver spurs sat side by side on the mantel, reunited at last, catching the morning light like promises kept.